Hello everyone and welcome to QualityOldHomm. Today we are making another tier list, this time from spells in Heroes of Might and Magic 3 in Horn of the Abyss expansion. And the tier list is based on single player, so I think there might be some rather major differences compared to multiplayer as well. Furthermore, the tier list is based significantly on my HotA series for spells, where they were tested against in several different scenarios. And furthermore, there is this situational category, because I feel some of the spells can be rather really great or just trash, depending on the situation. So of course all of the spells work better in some situations. For example, damage dealing spells work better if you don't have that, for example, expert earth magic or something like that, compared to some buffs or debuffs, where the expert level affects the results significantly. But I think those are not quite enough to put those spells in situational category, but you'll see what I'll be putting there. But without further ado, let's begin with tier 1 spells. First we have Bless, and based on the results, actually tier 1 buffs are quite strong overall, and of course the debuffs as well. But I think Bless is actually so good that I will give it directly S tier. And of course one additional thing to remember is that I'm not comparing the spells only by, say, damage output. Also the requirements, so the spell level and the spell cost affects things. So for example, the value of implosion is devalued because it's so much a late game spell. So for example, Magic Arrow might be better because it's available early in the game and might be used quite a bit more in the gameplay. But let's see how I will rank them. But yeah, Bless in S tier. Of course there are some units where the spell is rather useless, but I mean overall I think it's really good. Then we have Bloodlust. That increase to attack value can be rather nice, but I don't think the benefits are just as great as with Bless, but still rather valuable spell, and I think I will give them A tier. So of course here the value of both of these buffs is increased if one has expert water magic and expert fire magic, quite significantly. But I think that's kind of the assumption for me, that you are rather good at using the spell you have here. Then we have Cure. I mean, yeah, it can be rather nice, especially as you can dispel those enemy debuffs and heal some of the units, but I mean, for example, if enemy casts slow on you and then moves and you cast Cure and then you move, but the enemy can cast slow next turn once again. So it kind of feels that it's a reaction spell instead of taking the initiative in your hands. And thus I would say that Cure is B tier or weak A for me. Of course in some situations it can be rather nice if you have multiple debuffs on your units, but overall I think I would prefer, for example, Haste to counter that slow instead of Cure. Then we have Curse. I mean, yeah, another S tier spell in my books. And actually I think that might, yeah, so pretty much on par with Bless. And actually this is one of the things that makes Black Knights and Red Knights rather cool units, because the effects of Curse spell can be rather significant in some cases. So really nice debuff to cast on the enemies. Then we have Dispel. I mean, it's rather similar to Cure, and of course you can kind of dispel enemy buffs and accidentally your own buffs as well, and it does not include healing. So my feelings about it are rather similar to Cure, except that perhaps due to the lack of healing, the spell is not quite as good, because I think the ability to dispel enemy buffs and that you will also dispel your own buffs kind of counter each other out. So it's a bit situational which of these is better, but I will give them this order here. Then we have Haste, and actually based on the testing, Haste might very well be the best spell in the game. And I'm going to give it high S tier. And what I like about the spell is that it's early available, and furthermore you can practically, you keep the initiative in your hands with this spell. And of course, if you compare it to some damage dealing spells, yeah, it doesn't bring the benefits straight away, but unless it's countered, the benefits will last quite a few turns. So casting buffs will kind of add up during as the battle progresses, whereas the damage dealing spells, it's kind of one-off thing. So yeah, and of course, yeah, I think I already said that you keep the initiative with Haste, and that extra movement can be really significant, especially if you have slower creatures in your army. Then we have Magic Arrow. I think it deserves a place in A tier. I mean, I'm rather excited usually about having this one because it can make some of the early game fights rather manageable without... You don't need to think the battles too much when you use Magic Arrow. Of course, you need to consider how to regain the spell points, but still, I think rather useful, or really useful early game spell. Of course, the value decreases as the game progresses, contrary to these buffs and debuffs, which can actually become more and more important as you gain mastery in the air magic or water magic, etc., etc. Then we have protection from water. I don't know. I'm kind of tempted to give it D, C, D. I don't usually use these protection spells too much, because, well, the protection is not 100%, it's pretty much only about damage, so I don't think they feel that useful. There might be some niche situations where they are good, but overall I think they are rather useless. It's way better to use one proper spell of your own than protection spell. But perhaps I'm wrong. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Then we have shields, lowering melee damage you receive. I think that's S tier. So that's minus 30% reduction can be rather significant. So clearly a buff well used in some situations. Then we have slow. I don't think it's quite as good as Haste, but still these two are kind of paired. I think strong A, weak S, let's put them there. And especially useful if you have a lot of missile units, but perhaps that's a bit of situationality. But yeah, I mean, really solid spell as well. Then we have Stone Skin, and based on testing, actually Shields is quite a bit better than Stone Skin. Well, quite a bit, that can be a bit relational, but overall solid enough spell, and I think I would take Stone Skin over Shield in battles where the enemy has many archers or missile units. But as a general rule of thumb, based on testing, Shield trumps over Stone Skin. Then we have Summon Boat. I mean, that first spell I think is situational. It can be rather critical in some maps and completely useless in others. But perhaps, well, yeah, I think it's situational. Then we have some campaign map spells I admit I probably use too little. So, View Air, View Earth and Visions. I think I will give all of them B tier, especially the first casting can be rather significant. At the same time, perhaps the value decreases as the game progresses and you get to know the map better and better, but in the early game it might be crucial to know from where to try to locate some mine or resources, or where the enemy is and what they have. So kind of they are useful, but I have to admit that I'm using them too little in my scenario playthroughs. Then let's move to tier 2. First we have blind, clear S tier material, one of the spells that can actually turn the tide in very difficult battles. Of course, there is the situation where the enemy can counter them, but yeah, really nice, and this is what makes unicorns and war unicorns really great units as well. Then we have Death Ripple, and this is another situational spell. So if you are playing with Necropolis or have undead troops, of course it can be really great. Otherwise it's trash. So yeah, it's highly situational. Then we have Disguise. I think this might be more for multiplayer purposes. So from single player perspective, I don't know if I have ever used that spell. Once again, that might be kind of my bad, but I'm not sure if there is too much use for the spell. So I'm going to give it D tier. Once again, if you disagree, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Then we have Disrupting Ray. I mean, it can be rather okay in some situations, but what I kind of dislike about this, it targets only one enemy unit for debuff, and what's nice, you can cast multiple of these things on the enemy, but I mean, it's always using up your turn to cast spell. So perhaps in some situations it will be rather useful, but why to use it when you have some of these, for example, tier 1 buffs and debuffs available? So yeah, in some cases perhaps be, I don't know if it's too high. Should it be C? Well, let's give it weak B, at least for now. Then we have Firewall. Of course, if you have proper hero for this and you like to abuse the AI in battles, it can be rather nice. But overall, especially in the early game, by the way, but overall I think it deserves a place in A tier. Somewhat based on the testing, and also, yeah, I think A tier. Then we have Fortune, and I think actually most of the buffs and debuffs that are higher than tier 1 actually are quite often worse than those. So Fortune kind of adds one additional RNG for the battle. If you are lucky, well, then you have a nice Fortune on your side, but I mean, it's too random for my liking. And actually the results with Fortune are not that great, so I will give it only C tier. Then we have Ice Bolt. I mean, yeah, overall I think Ice Bolt and Lightning Bolt are kind of the similar spells, and usually I like Lightning Bolt more because it deals more damage. But Ice Bolt is not actually bad in my books, so you can do rather well with it, and it's a bit cheaper to cast than Lightning Bolt. So A tier, and Lightning Bolt will go to S tier. Actually, I think Lightning Bolt might be very well the spell I use the most from tier 2 quite often. So in my books, rather solid one. Oh, okay, blind is better. No questions about that overall, but in some situation Lightning Bolt can actually be better because of the damage you can inflict. Then we have Precision, a bit of situational spell. So, but you quite often do have some missile units in your army, so it's not completely situational, but I think the value from the spell is not that great. Perhaps excluding, say, Tower, that has 3 ranged units, but overall I think kind of a mid-tier spell. Then we have Protection from Air. Once again, protection spell, I don't like them too much, and also it's 1 tier higher, of course. Air magic has more damage dealing spells, so perhaps that there are some grounds for the higher tier, but yeah. And then we have Protection from Fire, once again D tier. So I don't think there are actually well, there are actually some rather heavy damage dealing fire spells such as Armageddon or something like that. So yeah, kind of situational, but yeah, I don't like these protection spells too much. Then we have Quicksand. I mean, the ability to kind of end enemy turn rather quickly can be nice, but overall it's once again rather high RNG, and thus I think I will give it only something decent here. Then we have Remove Obstacle. I don't use that spell too much, perhaps I should, but overall I don't think there is too much use for it. Perhaps if you have many ranged units, then in some cases, but why to waste your spell for this one if you can use, for example, Precision or some other spells in those situations. So kind of feels relatively obsolete. Then we have Scuttle Boat. Once again, I think that's situational as well as Summon Boat. And then we have Weakness. A debuff, what I don't like about it is that the costs are a bit higher, and I think the benefits are actually lower if you compare Weakness to these tier 1 buffs and debuffs. Then let's move to tier 3. First we have Air Shield, once again a niche spell, so yeah, high C tier. If enemy has many missile units, then the value is higher, but usually I think some other spell will work quite a bit better. It's not just horrible, but there are so many better alternatives. Then we have Animate Death, kind of the resurrection spell for Undead or Necropolis. So highly situational if you are playing with Necropolis, clearly S tier spell. If you are playing with something else, clearly D tier spell. So based on faction. Then we have Anti-Magic. Yeah, can be useful in some situations, but at least I find that I will use it very rarely, if at all. So D tier from me. Destroy Undead, once again, situational. So if you are facing Necropolis, then that might be good. If you are facing something else, well, it's just useless. Then we have Earthquake. It's for sieges. I'm not sure how often you are in a situation where you need to level the castle walls very quickly. So, I mean, if there is kind of relatively even forces and you just need to take the settlements, then perhaps. But once again, you might have damage dealing spells, you might have better buffs available, so perhaps excluding some very special situations, I think this spell is only D tier for me. Then we have Fireball, AoE spell. I think I will give it a bit weaker A tier. I mean, the damage per hex is not that high in my opinion, compared to these that target single hex and enemy over there. But of course it's not bad spell, especially if the army numbers are relatively small and you can inflict, or the enemies are clumped up, you can inflict rather serious damage with this one. But overall only A tier on the weaker side in my books. Then we have Force Field, kind of a spell that needs player control to shine. So in some situations, for example, if you have missile units and enemy, or missile unit and enemy only has melee units, then with Force Field you can actually win the battle quite nicely. But once again, it's relatively situational. Of course, another use is that if you want to block the enemy inside their fort or block their tier 7 creature, that cannot fly on one corner of the battle map if it starts there and you can cast spell first. That's rather nice. So it does have multiple uses, but perhaps not quite a top-notch spell. Then we have Forgetfulness. Counter to enemy missile units, I think a relatively situational spell. And overall, if the enemy does have, say, 1 or 2 stacks of missile units, then some other buffs or debuffs might work once again better, and considering this is tier 3 spell, perhaps it does not quite bring the value one would expect from this type of a spell. Then we have Frostring. I was actually initially going to give it B tier, but I think it's actually pretty much on par with Fireball. Both of them deal same amount of damage, but what I like about Frostring is that if you're surrounded by enemies, you have only 1 hex unit going, you can use it rather efficiently. So yeah, it has its uses, but perhaps it's a bit more difficult to use compared to Fireball, so a bit lower ranking in my books. Then we have Hypnotize. I mean, the idea of the spell is really great. What I don't like about it is the kind of weakness. So you cannot take control of strong enemy stacks practically in any battle. And thus, that raises the question why to use the spell, because if you take control of weak stack, what's the benefit? And usually when Hypnotize becomes practically available in battle is the end battle, and by then you have pretty much already lost or won the battle. So yeah, D tier from me. Then we have Mirth, actually Landmine. Once again, D tier. Of course, the damage can be nice, what it can inflict, but actually it's quite heavily RNG once again. So does the enemy walk into mine, and of course if it walks only in one mine, then the value of the spell is weaker than or smaller than the value of Lightning Bolt, for example. So, and it costs more and it's more difficult to get. So I don't think it actually provides that much value. D tier from me. Then we have Mirth. Once again, RNG spell. However, additional turn is always nice for a unit, but the kind of chance for that additional turn is quite small, in my experience. So, once again, a buff that actually underperforms those of tier 1 buffs and is more difficult to get and is more expensive, so why to use it? Then we have Misfortune, tier 3 debuff. I mean, if that's C tier, I think this is once again D tier. I mean, the value is not that great compared to those tier 1s, so the spell feels kind of obsolete. And then we have Protection from Earth. Might be nice against Implosion, but overall, I think it goes to D tier along with other spells too. Then let's move to, we have one tier 3 still, Teleport. So in bigger battles, and especially if you control some AoE attack units such as Chaos Hydras, this spell can be rather golden. Or if you have slow troops such as Ancient Behemoths you want to get right next to the enemy tier 7 unit, then the spell can be great. And of course, with those expert stats, the cost is very slow. Of course, you don't probably want to use this at the beginning of the battle, because those buffs are most beneficial at that point. So it's kind of I think its value increases as the battle progresses. Once the first buffs and debuffs are cast, then the spell might be rather nice, but in player hands it can really shine, and because of that I think I will give it strong A tier. Then we have Armageddon. yeah, the spell is kind of OP if you have such things as black dragons or fire elementals or some really high fire resistance. At the same time, in other situations, it's not that great. Of course, well combined with protection from fire, it can work as rather nicely as well, but I think it's relatively situational. There are many cases where the spell is rather useless and other cases where it's really useful. So, situational. Then we have Berserk. It can be kind of the game changer in very difficult battles. And if you watch some, say, example playthroughs of really difficult battles, then most often Berserk is used in those. So it can be really nice. What hampers it is the rather high requirements. And yeah, so I think I will give it weak S tier. Based on the battle results alone, I think it could go quite the way up here on the top, but because of the high requirements, relatively high costs, it will remain somewhere in the mid to low S tier in the game. So perhaps in the kind of facing high level enemy heroes, it can be rather useful, or it is rather useful, but I think in the early game you don't have access to it, so it kind of limits its usability in the game. Then we have Chain Lightning. I mean, yeah, rather nice AoE attack. Solid spell, of course, you can hit yourself with it accidentally. Don't ask how many times I have done that. So it can be rather difficult to predict where it will jump until you gain enough experience with it. And also then it can hit you even if you have no other reasonable options for spells. So yeah, that's a minus, but it can deal rather nice damage when used against enemies, especially in the first rounds of the battle. So A tier from me. Then we have Clone. Somewhat situational. So the clone stacks are destroyed rather easily, but of course destroying that stack will cost enemy a spell or unit movement. And if you pair these with Archangels, the results can be rather magnificent. At the same time, with other units, perhaps not quite so good, but still with proper use, this spell is one of the better from tier 4. It can shine really nicely in quite many situations. So A tier from me. Then we have Counter-Strike. I mean, the idea of the spell once again is rather nice. So the unit becomes pretty much as Royal Griffins. Really nice when you charge right into the midst of the enemy. However, the AI seems to avoid attacking those units. So in testing, the spell actually didn't fare that well. So based on the score alone, it would receive D. But I think there are at least some situations where it can be rather beneficial. So C tier from me. Then we have Fire Shield, another C tier spell. I mean, the damage output is not that great, but at least some of the units with AI control can be zoned out from attacking that unit with the spell. But yeah, once again, I mean, there are quite a few better spells available, and this costs quite a bit, so the damage output of this spell seems to be too small compared to its level and price. With decent damage output, it could go quite a bit higher, but as it is, I think C tier, and perhaps I'm a bit too generous over here. Then we have Frenzy. I think this spell actually requires a combo of a unit and this spell to be utilized for full efficiency. For example, Crimson Kotals, some units with no retaliation. Actually, coming to think of it, Chaos Hydra with Frenzy just before you can attack large stack of enemies or large clump of enemies might be rather nice. But overall, I think once again the spell seems to be relatively niche if you consider the level and cost. So I will give it only C tier, though high C tier, because in some situations with some units it can be rather good. Then we have Inferno. I have always thought that this spell kind of feels... it does too little damage for the kind of feel or image one gets from Inferno. Of course, the area is rather nice, and the damage, I think it could be a bit higher, but yeah, the spell does have its uses, but once again, it's tier 4, quite expensive. I'm not sure. Perhaps weak A would be the best place for it. Let's put it over there. Then we have Meteor Shower. I think this is actually one of the better tier 4 spells. I'm going to give it weak S tier. The damage it deals is really nice, and the area of is the same as Fireball and almost like the Frost Ring, so any clumps up enemies will receive quite a beating, especially in the first turn. You can most often use this against 3 stacks, so that's really nice. Then we have perhaps the exception for higher tier than tier 1 buffs, namely Prayer, and I will give it S tier. And the reasoning is that it kind of combines several spells. So some aspects of haste, some aspects of bloodlust, and some aspects of stone skin, as it improves speed, attack and defense, all of them. By itself, the buffs are not as great as from the other spells, but as they are kind of combined in one spell, that makes Prayer special. So you free up those spellcasting times for other spells when using Prayer, and that's the reason it's getting S tier from me. Then we have Resurrection, and that's another S tier spell. I mean, especially when you are fighting the neutral monsters on the map before going against enemies, and of course in single player against enemies as well. What I like about this is that you can make sure that your army is not diminishing as you are adventuring on the map. So that basically means you don't need to go back for reinforcements, and you can keep facing at least enemies of similar difficulty, if not harder, as your hero is growing stronger. So really solid one. And of course the downside is that it's tier 4. So yeah, perhaps not quite on the tippity top of S tier, but rather solid spell in any case. Then we have Slayer. I mean, D tier, very situational, and the buff to attack value is not that great in my opinion. In any case, only slightly higher than that of Bloodlust. So yeah, perhaps not quite that valuable spell. Then we have Sorrow, kind of lowering the morale of the enemy units. Once again, very RNG and not very good. So clearly a D tier spell in my books. You should use some, for example, tier 1 buff instead. Then perhaps my favorite spell, especially in campaign map or in the scenario map, Town Portal. Clearly S tier, saves so much time, and especially when playing against AI, you can use one hero to be on the offensive, and then you need only one hero to pretty much make sure that none of your cities get taken, and it's easy to deliver troops for the main hero as well via Town Portal, so clearly S tier from me. Then we have Water Walk. There are some movement speeds, mentioned or fly. in addition to Water Walk, and I think this is by far the weakest one. So C tier, the usage is most limited on this one, and the requirements are not actually that much lower that it would warrant higher tier than C. Then we have Dimension Door. In utility alone, I would give it clear S tier. However, as it's tier 5 spell, it might be a bit difficult to get actually. But when you do get it, it makes life in the campaign map quite a bit easier. So strong A from here. And the reason why it's not S is that it's tier 5 and it's rather difficult to get. So clearly limited to mid-late, late game only. Then we have Fly, B tier. Regarding those movement spells, I think Dimension Door is by far the superior, but Fly is better than Water Walk in most of the situations, if not all. So B tier, of course, kind of if you get Fly as a tier 5 spell, at least I tend to be a bit annoyed because I would have liked to gotten Dimension Door, as it's quite a bit better. Then we have Implosion. I think it's strong A. Once again, if only one considers how it performs in battle, then most likely S tier, but once again, it's tier 5, relatively difficult to get, not even available for all of the factions, so those things are limiting its usability. I hope I'm consistent with this regarding the Town Portal, which is kind of my favorite, but still, strong A tier spell, especially useful against those big monstrous tier 7 stacks. Then we have Magic Mirror. I mean, yeah, it would be really nice to reflect spells back to enemies, but what's not great is that there is only a chance for that. So you are using up tier 5 spell for RNG that presumes that the enemy will actually cast the spell on the enemy you are protecting. And I mean, that's trash. If the enemy casts the spell on the unit you are protecting, and if the Magic Mirror activates, then that's really nice. But how often the situation is such that this is the case? So yeah, D tier from me. Sacrifice. This might be a bit controversial. I mean, the spell is rather nice if you have low tier unit, which you can sacrifice to revive high tier units such as, say, Archdevils or something like that. So that can be rather nice, but at the same time, the spell feels relatively niche. So, and also you will be losing some of your own troops. So I would rather prefer Resurrection. But, I mean, in some situations the spell can be rather useful, but overall I think in longer term it's not quite on par with those better tier 5 and tier 4 spells too. So yeah, B from me. Then we have these 4 summon elemental spells. These actually summon air elemental and summon water elemental gives the same amount of troops, and summon earth elemental and summon fire elemental gives the same amount of troops. So these two a bit larger number than these two. Let's begin with this one. I have always actually liked air elementals. So usually they are tier 2 troops, but the speed is rather nice. They take only 1 hex. Of course, the damage range can be quite big, but with Bless, they can do rather well. So perhaps I'm a bit biased here, but I will give them A tier. And water elementals usually, even though they are a bit stronger than air elementals, I find them a bit too clunky and a bit too slow to be that much of use in battle. So because of that, I will give them only B tier. Then about these fire and earth elementals, as they come in same numbers, earth elementals as tier 5 units are rather trash, but as summon I think they are clearly the sturdiest one. So you get most hit points and most damage out from elemental summon with earth elemental, and fire elemental as its tier 4 units is somewhat suffering from the same numbers as summon earth elemental. It's not, and of course the speed is not that much greater than with those earth elementals, so I think it will go to B tier as well. So this is my view of the spells in Heroes of Might and Magic Horn of the Abyss expansion. Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. Have a great rest of the day. QualityOldHomm out.